All right, we're going live, guys. We are live, I think. Hello, chat. Are you there? Is the stream working? Welcome, everybody. MergePHP June 2023. We're here. We got everybody together. You made it. Yay.
Yay.
All right, chat saying yes, we're good to go. Okay, great. So we're gonna do some intros here. We'll go through the intro slides, and then we'll get started with the speaker. We're doing a live in-person event. So if you're here in Austin, there's a number of us here in Austin, and including the speaker that will be giving the presentation live. So yay, Austin. And then everybody else is going to be remote. Yeah, let's talk about MergePHP. Let's talk about PHP, guys. What do you think? And you may have noticed we've got a new group. So everybody, welcome Portland. Woo! Welcome Portland. Yay.
Hello, I'm from
all right.
PHP DX, if you can remember how to say the acronym.
PHP DX, yep. I am not going to remember that. Okay, so Atlanta, Chris is here, and we're gonna do the giveaway. So first person to email Chris at atlantaphp.org wins a JetBrains license. So yep, this is your countdown. It usually goes quick. Got that email up. Any emails before 6 o'clock at 6:10 is invalid. If you've got that queued up, it's a different time every week, so no gaming the system.
Previous winner too, we try to let other people get a chance as well. We've had somebody who's got a couple, and I thought, okay, let's spread it around a little bit better. So but still try. We've had a couple times we've not had anybody mail me, so they're still available when we get a chance.
Awesome. Welcome everybody from Atlanta. Yeah, so I'm gonna go through this here pretty quick. So Boston PHP, and it's run by Bobby, and they do a virtual self-study group as well. I see Jean in the chat. So hello, Jean. So if you're interested in doing, leveling up your skills, there's a virtual self-study group run through the Boston PHP meetup. And it's self-paced learning, and there's a different cohort about once a quarter, and it's always going on. So check out Boston PHP. Austin PHP, that's
collaborative.
Sorry, Bobby, what did you say?
Self-paced learning, but it's also collaborative.
Austin PHP, that's us, and Austin adjacent, we have a PHP conference usually in the fall, so check out Longhorn PHP, and you can find us on Meetup. Seattle PHP is Tim. Hello, Tim. Hello, everybody.
How many giveaways or conferences, so I feel kind of left out.
Tim's awesome. So we definitely appreciate everybody from Seattle that's attending.
How about the next person to email me gets one of the elephants in Josh's background?
Giving away other people's stuff. I like it. So, and we're officially international group. So we've got PHP Vancouver, and that's run by a couple guys there. PHP Vegas, or Vegas Programmers, is run by Joshua Copeland, and his company sponsors MergePHP, and helps give away JetBrains licenses and some of the other stuff that we do. So thanks to Josh.
You got it.
Sorry, go ahead, Josh.
No, yeah. First to email me gets one of Tim's elephants, since he has a larger collection, actually.
Nice. Yeah, and if you're going to DEF CON or Black Hat, definitely email Josh for maybe you can crash on his couch. Now we're talking, right?
Yeah, definitely if you're in the Vegas area, I know this is a big conference town, definitely shout me out. But I'm gonna try to make it to Longhorn this year too. So if not, we'll catch you there.
Nice. KCPHP, that's Eric there, and Dan and John as well. And they do 2 meetings a month. And if you're in the KC area, yeah, definitely check them out. They do in-person stuff, or are looking to get back to doing the in-person stuff. I can't remember, Eric, where are you guys at? Oh.
Sorry, we are currently doing the coffee shop and this event. Eventually we might get back into doing a presentation.
Awesome. Utah PHP is Mark and Derek. Yep, they I think they joined last year. Welcome everybody from Utah. If you want to go skiing and you need a place to stay, hit up Mark.
We're running a travel agency here.
Yeah, I'm just a PHP travel agency. That's happening. Just kidding, guys, about the traveling. So San Diego PHP, hopefully everybody had a good time at PHP Tech. And Eric and John are a big part of that, and they run the San Diego PHP user group. So definitely check out San Diego PHP and PHP Tech. Hello, everybody from San Diego. And as I mentioned, Portland, welcome Portland. We're happy to have more PHP groups join us. And if you have a local PHP group or a PHP organizer, definitely hit us up. We're always interested in welcoming more people into the collective. And so this is the monthly PHP, better upgrade your PHP slide. So hopefully you're not on 7 or below. Here's some upcoming conferences, some additional upcoming conferences happening this year. So definitely check them out online. And the Longhorn CFP is maybe open, maybe still open.
Is open through the end of the month.
Longhorn CFP is open through the end of the month. Yes. Okay.
And
thanks,
if you
Ian.
go have hot chicken with Matt Trask, go check out FacadeCon in Nashville this July.
That sounds fun. I love Nashville hot chicken. So you can find us online in various places, and definitely check us out on php.social. And if you're watching the video on YouTube, definitely hit us, do the whole YouTube thing, like and subscribe, hit the notification bell, leave a comment, all the things. All right, yeah, so next month we've got WP CLI for PHP developers. So definitely check out the talk next month, and we hope you guys can make it. But more importantly, we are here for this month to hear Israel talk. So welcome, and thank you for Israel for speaking. Yay, Israel.
Thank you.
All right, so I'm going to pass it over to Israel and we can get started.
Okay. You can see me okay, hear me okay? Last check.
Yep.
All right, good. So as Logan said, we're here in person. So for you watching online, I'm not going to be focused on the screen. I'm going to be looking and walking around, but I'll be sharing my screen the whole time. So you won't get to look at my pretty face. My name is Israel. Oh, that one is? Yeah. Oh, but it's not connected. So, wait. I haven't connected it here. We'll be fine. Oh. So yeah, let me just go ahead and share my screen. We'll get started. Oh, yeah, you're right. Okay, so what we're doing today is we're comparing Symfony and Laravel. Those are the two main modern frameworks for PHP. We're going to try to compare these two without judgment. And you'll see the name of this project here that I have for the presentation. It says Symphony Y Laravel, Y as in the Spanish for and. It's not V, it's not Symphony versus Laravel. My wife recently started selling cookies, Italian cookies, recipes that she has inherited from her family, all the way from Sicily. If you remember the Godfather movies, and Corleone is where it all started. That's where her family is from. And her signature cookie that she makes is called a cucciadati. And one time at a local event here in Austin, a woman stopped by her booth and she picked up a sample and tasted it. And her immediate reaction was, this tastes like my grandmother. Not it tastes like my grandmother's cookies, but this tastes like my grandmother. And she immediately started crying. And that's the kind of power that we have with our emotions when we get attached to something. And that's from all of our experiences that we have lived through. And as an engineer, if you're working a lot in Laravel or Symfony, you mature, you grow, you learn, you do awesome things, and those emotions can attach you to that framework. And so while we're comparing them, you might notice yourself when we're talking about the framework that you're maybe used to, you'll feel like, yeah, that's right. That's the right way to do things. And when we compare that to the other framework, you might feel, no, that's just the wrong way to do things. And your emotions will get in the way. So try to suspend that for just a little bit and see how things are done differently. And maybe you'll learn something and enjoy trying out different things. Oh, my windows are, let me do some window management. Hang on. I can't click. There we go. So we're going to be talking about the three main components of an MVC framework. And if you're not familiar, MVC is for model, view, and controller. And so we're going to discuss those. Then we'll end with talking a little bit about testing in the different frameworks and some engineering considerations. Some of these things we're going to, here, let me watch my time. Some we might take more time on, some we might just touch on a little bit, or skip entirely. So if you have questions, do we have someone watching the chat?
Yeah, I'll watch.
Okay, go ahead and ask, interrupt. There's a lot more here than I could talk about in 45 minutes. We could talk for 3 hours if we wanted to. So feel free to help guide where this discussion is going. Oh man, my mouse. All right, we're going to give up on the hand mouse. So let's talk about models. What is a DBAL? A DBAL is a database abstraction layer. Okay, so you're using code to write code for you to get information from a database. And Symfony uses Doctrine, and Laravel uses Eloquent, which I believe is like Laravel only. But Doctrine you can find used in other places too. It's an independent project. So we set up Doctrine in a new Symfony project. This is what it looks like. We run a command to say, make me a model so I can interact with my database. And the command will ask you, well, what are all the different things that you want to model about the data? And so you can see it asks for a field name, a field type, and then it creates some of the code for you. But with Laravel, when you ask it to create a model, it doesn't ask you what fields you want, what kind of fields they are. It asks you what are the different components that you want to create to help you interact with the data. So it asks you for, do you want a factory? Do you want a form request, migrations, policies, resource controllers? So these are all things that are related to, permissions. Can you see different parts of data? Or setting up data for testing, or for required data for a new application. So what they're doing is Doctrine is modeling the data itself. And they're called entities. And Laravel doesn't really care about the data itself. It's not the code that's created is not related directly to the database table. And so if we wanted to set up the columns on a table in Laravel, you have to then create the migration yourself or write out and define it. And so the file, the code for the model is not mapping directly to schema changes. You have to do that yourself, and the code stays unaware of what your table looks like. Let's switch over to, okay. So when we created the model in Symfony with Doctrine, you'll notice it created all of the fields we asked it for. The ID, the UID, the name, and the other things that it's related to. In Laravel with Eloquent, models. Okay, there's more changes here, but anyway, it doesn't have the fields defined in the code until you start adding attributes, which are ways that Laravel wants to interact with the data without it really knowing what the table looks like. So with Doctrine, the schema is mapped, whereas with Eloquent and Laravel, it's just the attributes that you define. Oh, and here's and these are, there we go. There we go. So when we, what am I looking at again? Sorry, I've lost my place. All right, yeah, so this is the Symphony. When we first created those entities. that here, okay, so here's what that model looked like at the very beginning. It only had the field names and some of the information about them. Whereas with Laravel, it only wanted to know some information about the fields so it could make queries for you, getting information from the database. So you can see here, well, yeah, there's no property on the model that says this is the field name, right? So with Doctrine, because the model itself is not making a query for you, it's not writing the SQL, the SQL, you need to have an entity manager. And that manager is going to help you build your queries. Whereas with Eloquent, the model itself is what's called an active record. And so you're going to use the model to build your queries. Now, they both have what's called lazy loading and eager loading. So when you have a relationship between two different models, like with our examples, we had a human and a pet, and humans can have pets or pets can have humans. And you're querying for one of them from the database. If it's lazy loaded, then when you get a human record, their data will be aware that there's a relationship with, say, the pet that the human owns. But it won't get all of that data from the database. With eager loading, it'll get all of that information, so you'll have it ready and available. Now, why is that important? If you're lazy loading information from the database and then you access it in your code, it's going to then automatically go and query that information from the database, which is fine unless you have a human with, say, 100 pets. And then you want to iterate over each of those pets and get the information from them. If it was lazy loaded, then it's going to send a query to the database for each one. But if you've eager loaded it, then all of that data is already queried from the database, you have it available, and when your code iterates over all of them, it's not connecting with the database again and again and again. Now, Doctrine prefers lazy loading. And if you look at their documentation, the example that they want to show you that they're most excited about is saying you can set up a proxy, which would be like a model with all of the data, but the data is not there. It only has the ID and the potential for all of the data, but it hasn't gotten it from the database. And they're showing you that you can create your own proxies and say, create them on the fly. And here they use an example of an item, adding it to a shopping cart. And that's fine. It's interesting. But what happens if in your code, you send that cart to another function somewhere else? And now that information is available to another part of your code. And then another engineer comes along the next day, writes some new code and says, oh, look, there's the cart available in this other function. I'm just going to iterate through all of the items in the cart and get their price or whatever they want. but they don't realize that it's a proxy object, that it hasn't gotten that information from the database. So that's risky, right? You have a lot of performance concerns, but that is the way Doctrine likes to do things. But with Laravel, they prefer eager loading. Yes, there's lazy loading, but their example emphasizes that concern, the n+1 problem, where if you have an unknown number of things in a list and you iterate over each of them, what problems can happen from that? And so their example is to immediately show you how do you solve that problem. And yes, while in Doctrine, they have functionality for joining tables and eagerly loading that information from the database, it's not as simple and easy. Whereas in Laravel, they make it almost too easy. It's like intuitive. It's, yes, give me this book with all of the authors, like immediately. And so, and here I've pulled out some of from the documentation. You can see Doctrine is really opinionated about how they do things. If you've ever tried to contribute to the Doctrine project, you'll find out very quickly that the maintainers have very strong opinions about how things are done. Whereas with Eloquent, their immediate concern is helping you with your performance problems and making sure that you have a good, efficient application. And then there's with Eloquent, there's other strange stuff going on. If you're not familiar, if you're used to Doctrine and entity models, there are a lot of strange features that Laravel provides that aren't discoverable. That you have to know they're there. You have to know the documentation or have a friend who knows and you can ask them. There's a lot of different array attributes that you can add in a model that control how different information is gotten from the database, how the query is resolved. So just be aware of those types of things. We have attributes, we have accessors and mutators. The data can change when you actually get it from the database. By the time you're using it in your application, a mutator could have already changed it. And so the information that you see is not really the information that's in the database. So you have to be aware of that. Data can be added that's not even in the database, but through the functionality automation in the Eloquent setup, depending on how you've defined things in your model, there can be unexpected data that's not even in the database. So before we move on, if there's any questions about Doctrine or Eloquent, let me know. Anyone here? We're good? Any from the chat? Okay. Okay, so that takes care of the model. Let's talk about the view layer. So when you're looking at data, and we're not going to concern ourselves with templated data. If you have a web application that also uses, like in Symphony, they'll use Twig. We're not concerned with that for this talk. We're focused on like API design. And so we're talking about how do you view the data. So after it's gotten from the database, processed through the application, and then sent to the user, it's going to be in some kind of JSON, hopefully not XML. So Symphony is going to serialize those entities because the model itself, the object, represents the data, how it's in the database. It's easily serializable. So it's transformed from an object or an array directly into JSON. Whereas with Laravel, the model itself is not the data. And so the query results then have to be transformed and normalized into ways that you can view it in JSON. So here you can see an example where in a controller action, you'll just say, give me the JSON representation of this array. And so that's going to be serialized. Whereas with Laravel, because the model is an active record, it's going to be able to do that transformation itself. It doesn't need a separate service. You can just ask the model, hey, normalize yourself into JSON. And then I can send that to the user or whoever requested it. So Symfony does have normalizers, but that's going to happen like in the process of some other service, the serializer, interacting with the model. Here. So you can see in the example, you're getting an instance of the normalizer, and then you're providing that to the serializer along with the data. And here the data is just an empty array. But it's not occurring in the model itself. And then there's also, you need to be concerned about the contexts. So depending on who the user is or in what context they requested the data, like are they asking for the data in a shopping cart, or are they an admin asking for the same data, but in a control panel? That context can be used to control what parts of the data they can see. And then with that and the normalizers, the serializer may change the data depending on how you're asking for it, in which context. But with Laravel, again, that's all happening in the model, in the active record. And so you're going to define those array attributes to say how to transform or normalize that data in which context. And there's a list of them here.
I have a question that's a bit, hopefully not too abstract in general. Are there philosophical disagreements between Symfony and Laravel as to what exactly MVC means?
And Israel, can you repeat the question
yes.
too? Yeah.
So the question was, are there philosophical disagreements about what MVC really means between Symfony and Laravel.
Because the reason I asked that is because when talking about like the model and the view, it's like they're doing such drastically kind of different stuff between them that it kind of makes me wonder if they like kind of even see the whole structure of MVC differently, I guess.
So yeah, so the comment was, I'm going to try to remember everything you said, because it seems like with Laravel that because so much is happening in the model itself, that it's not distinctly separate between M, V, and C. It's kind of like all happening in one place. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, that's like that's the way to put it. Yeah.
Okay. Maybe philosophical difference. Ian can maybe talk more about that. Laravel does have, this is a model, this is a view, this is a controller, but you are right, especially with the model and the view, they are very much the same thing, or just intertwined. Whereas with Symfony, they're very distinctly separate. And that is just a consequence, I think, of the kind of approach that the definition of the model between a data mapped model and an active record model. So with Symfony, when you want to protect some of that information, you don't want to just get all the information from the database and just blindly pass it on. Some of that information you want to protect. The biggest thing that you see a lot is applications that expose an incremental ID, where every object is a 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And that opens up a lot of security concerns. People will undoubtedly just write a script and try to farm everything from your application just by going through each ID and asking for, give me user 1, give me user 2, give me user 3. So that kind of data, you want to protect it. You don't want it to just get out there in the wild. And so with Symfony and Doctrine, you'll use attribute groups. You'll define on your model. And so you can say this field that's in the database on that table, we can let it be exposed to anyone getting this data in the context of show product or list product. But you can see in the example, in the description, they don't want that data shown when you're listing products. That makes sense. You don't need it, right? A list is just going to have limited data about the products. So not a security concern here, but in this example, there's no reason to get that data and send it to the user in that context. And with Laravel, instead of, well, you can control that in the model, but it's also, you can create what's known as a resource. And this can control not only the particular data that's shown, but you can also add permissions. I thought I had, maybe not. we look at, okay, here's the Laravel, HTTP, resources. Okay, so here I've created a resource, but you'll notice this is different than the example that we saw in their documentation, because this just says, give it the array, all of the data. And so what I'm doing here in this resource is I'm handing off that responsibility to the model itself. And so you have the choice to either control and protect the data that's sent to the user in the model, or you can use the resource. And then we won't get into this too much, but in both frameworks, you can package all of that data when you have a whole list that's being requested, an index request. You can paginate it. With Symfony, you're going to need to use a paginator. And with Laravel, you do that through your resources with a resource collection. Any questions around views? All right. Anything from the chat? All right, let's talk about controllers. This is what really shook me up when I first started working here at Atmosphere and getting into Laravel. Symfony uses dependency injection and only dependency injection. Back in the earlier Symfony days, you could get the container and do whatever you wanted with it. But that allowed for, or that allowing that came with a lot of performance problems. And to improve performance of the framework itself, all of the dependencies were proxied. And so they're constructed only when you actually need them. And so you always depend on your dependency injection. It uses auto wiring, so you can there's just some documentation if you want to read it later. What am I looking at? Okay, so this is diving into the Symfony kernel and how it constructs the container itself. This is not something that you would normally do in your everyday engineering work, but if you haven't, I would encourage you to try diving into the framework, follow the rabbit trails and see where they go. We're not going to do that now. With Laravel, yes, you can do dependency injection, but Laravel's one of its main purposes, I think, is it wants to help engineers quickly create code, create value in an application, and deliver it to the world. And so by using facades, you can anywhere in your code reference this facade and say, I want to use the service the class, whatever it is that this facade represents, without having to use dependency injection. Just give me that thing from the container and let me use it. So you can see in this example, they have the cache facade, and then they just use it. Nowhere is the cache service injected into this class through the constructor or through the function parameters. It's just there, and the facade will get it from the container, let you use it, and there it is. So okay, and this is showing that yes, you can still do auto injection just like in Symfony. So the request is kind of the same. So when the server handles the request, the HTTP request from the user, and starts your kernel, constructs your container, all of that, the information from the HTTP request is set up in this request object. And so there's functions to get either the post data or the request query arguments. Pretty straightforward. Now, a Laravel request is built on a Symfony request, but then it adds a lot of functionality. So you can see here the request input asking for the name, right? If you, let's see if we, okay. So here, this get function in the Laravel request is just passing on the functionality to the base Symfony request. But you'll notice the comment there says this method belongs to the Symfony HTTP foundation and is not usually needed when using Laravel. It's an interesting way to say it. You can still use it, it's there, and it's just going to directly be using that function on the Symfony request. So why would Laravel want to add other functionality? So here's the input. And what Laravel is doing here is using a bear function that it defines in the container to then get all of the request information from the Symfony request, adds in this first one, this without source all. So if the user had sent in a post request, it would be getting all of that information, but then it's adding all of the query arguments from the URL. And then this data get functionality is processing that data even more, okay? So if you're using the Laravel functionality, just be aware that you're getting more information than you might expect. But if you want to limit that and you want to make sure that you're only getting post data or only getting the query arguments, make sure you're using the Symfony request get method. we working? Here we go. And then if you're concerned with, if you want to set up security within your functionality, Symfony uses what's called voters. And whenever you say, check to see if the current user has permission to do whatever, get this data or do this functionality, Symfony will go through all of the voters and see if we can look at an example here. So when you say deny access unless granted, it's going to go through all of the voters that are defined and say, in this context for view, and depending on the current user, is this voter even concerned about checking permission? Yes or no? And it'll go through all the voters. And for any voter that says, yes, that's something I'm concerned about, it'll check, does this vote pass? And it'll go through all of them until it gets a yes. And if it makes it through all of the voters and none of them said yes, they all said no, then this will come back with false and no, the user does not have access. Laravel will use policies, and we saw a little bit before. It looks similar in the controller action. So you have a function, instead of deny unless granted, it just says, authorize. But then it also has the context and the data that you want to know if they have access to it. So very similar, but slightly different. So this is another big thing that tripped me up a little bit when I started working in Laravel. Symfony is very much dependent on events. And so through the whole life cycle of a request, the app starting up, the container compiling, the request being processed, the data being queried, the view being constructed, the response being sent, all of those things dispatch events. And so you can subscribe to any of those events and say, when that event happens, also do this other thing. So, and then you can dispatch your own events, of course. Laravel, not so much. Yes, there's events in Laravel, but the way to hook into base processes in the framework, you're going to use middleware, which is not something that Symfony has something comparable. So here you can see an example where when they're defining a route, they're going to add a middleware that says when the functionality related to this route is operated on, also use my middleware and apply whatever, in this case, the authentication for that route. All right, so that's all of MVC, kind of. We skipped a lot. There's a lot of examples that we didn't go through in detail. Are there any questions around the controllers, service layer? Anything from the chat?
Looks like chat's good.
Okay.
This is maybe getting a bit outside of the slides at least, but I'm curious, the title of the talk and the content seem to have been kind of mismatched so far. The title was about kind of like lessons learned from like actually kind of doing like a migration or like going from one to the other. So like I'm a bit curious, what are your more like personal experiences with well, first of all, did you like migrate an existing application, or just you were developing in one land, now you're developing in another land? And second of all, like what has been like the more kind of like personal experiences rather than like the kind of nitty-gritty differences between the different components?
Okay, so the question is, what is the more, I guess you would say, the more human side of all of this?
Yeah.
What if you're migrating from,
Well, but yeah, specifically for,
Okay.
for yours.
or my experience? Yes.
Yeah.
And actually, we're going to get into that. So my final comments here are about the consequences of all the differences that we've been comparing, and some things to be concerned about in things that you might be planning for new projects or for your current work.
So, that's the engineering. Yeah.
Right.
Oh, okay.
It's a good question.
Yeah.
Yes.
I wonder how the talk would kind of come differently if you put that at the beginning and then did the other stuff afterwards, or maybe like that back and forth. But I will be patient.
Okay. That's a good thought.
Yeah, before we move on, Israel, we did have one question from chat. And they were wondering, why is Laravel in high demand?
Why is Laravel in high demand? It's a good question. There could be a couple of reasons. I think the main one is just the design of Laravel. It's designed specifically on purpose for easy setup, easy entry as a new engineer or as a new project. It's very, very quick. And I have some examples here coming up that demonstrate that. Symphony is more concerned with more disciplined code and engineering practices. So it can be more of a challenge to get something new started, or for younger engineers. So the facades that we saw in Laravel, that's what really helps make engineering fast. If you know you have a service available, you can immediately use it. You don't have to worry about injecting it. But when you go to test that, then your test needs the container. Or if you want to mock it, it still needs the container to then put your mock in that place. So when your function asks for it, the facade will give you the mock instead of the actual service. Whereas with dependency injection, you can just create your mock and inject it. So when you're using facades, those dependencies are less visible. You could have someone add a facade and use it in a function without changing any of the tests, the automated tests, and the tests would still pass without being aware that this new service is actually operating in the function. And then you might have more services being used everywhere, and so it can become very complex very fast. And if all of your tests depend on the app being booted and the container existing with all of the services available, your tests can take a long time to run. It's not that big of a deal when it's a new project. There's not many dependencies. The tests can run pretty quickly, but let's say your tests on average are taking a half a second. That's a long time for one test. That's okay if you've got a few hundred tests. What happens when you've got 8,000 tests? Are you willing to wait 4,000 seconds? And then if you're not, what kind of developer experience is that? I'm writing code. I'm supposed to be testing it before I send it for code review, for QA. I'm not going to run all the tests. I'm not going to say, make one change and then go get another 30-minute coffee, right? And so that disincentivizes test-driven development, or TDD. Adam Waven has a really good presentation on test-driven development. He does separate tests between feature and unit tests, but if you pay attention, even those unit tests, because of the requirement for the container to present your make your facades available, they're actually still integration tests. They're not true unit tests. One of the first things I did when I joined Atmosphere was adding true unit tests. It is possible. You don't have to always use the Laravel's provided test case. You can use the base PHP unit test case.
You need to kind of you need to do some decoupling work though, right?
Yes. So the question is, would you still have to do some decoupling work? Yes. So if you want to truly unit test a function, it can't have any facades. That'll break, right? And so that requires introducing some more careful planning. If you want all of your services to be quickly unit tested, because you want to have that ability to have 8,000 tests, then you're going to have just a convention, an agreement between everyone to say, in our services, we're not going to use facades. We'll use facades in controller actions because those have to be integration tested anyway. But in services, no, it's always going to be dependency injection. All right, so let's talk about engineering. So the differences between the two frameworks and the strengths or the limitations that you have, you might want to be careful which one you choose depending on your needs. So are you startup? Do you need that speed? Do you need to quickly get out a prototype? You probably want to use Laravel.
Okay, I don't have a question, I have an answer.
Okay.
I have an answer. Someone previously asked the question, why, I think someone from chat previously asked the question, why is Laravel so popular? And I think I know the answer. The answer is because PHP's strengths as a language are kind of in the kind of startup speed category rather than the stability. If you're oh, we want a super stable application, a lot of people would lean towards another language than PHP, where someone's oh, I want to get a rapid prototype that delivers business value very quickly. PHP, there's a strong case for PHP. So I think that the reason Laravel is so popular is that it sort of is leading into the reasons people would even want to write a PHP to begin with. So that's kind of my answer to that question, which was a bit of a difficult answer question before.
Okay, so I'll try to summarize and repeat that for our online listeners. So the comment is kind of an answer to the earlier question about why Laravel is so popular, and it seems like the speed and the ease that Laravel is providing is in line with the design of PHP itself. Whereas if you're concerned about stability and strictness in your coding, you'll probably not even be using PHP. Is that the idea? Okay. All right. Good comment. But PHP, I think anymore now, it really is, it has its place in a stable ecosystem. And Symfony does answer that need too. So if you have business critical functionality that you want stable and you want to have strict discipline around with your engineering, PHP is still a good option. But that's where you might want to choose Symfony over Laravel. So here's the example I was talking about earlier. When I wanted to start a Laravel application, I only had to do 2 commands. Create the project and then run it. And I was done. Well, I changed some of the environment variables so that Docker would actually run, and that was it. With Symfony, different story. So I had to know a lot of the different components that I wanted to include in my application, install them, configure them. Symfony doesn't work with Docker out of the box. I had to take some of the configuration from another project, mash them together, make some other configuration changes so all of the environment was set up, and then run some more commands. And then I wanted to add testing. I wanted to add support for UUIDs. You know, all of that was not baked into the framework already. And so it was a lot more complex to get set up and going. And this is already knowing what I'm doing. If you didn't know all of this, it could take many, many days just to figure it all out, what's missing, and how to get it going. So you also want to align your choice with your needs. If you're a startup and you just need to hire as cheap as possible, as many people available as possible, you're probably going to pick Laravel. There's a lot of people here that know Laravel, not so many with Symfony. But if you're concerned about having a more disciplined engineering culture, maybe you already have your product market fit and you're wanting to mature your application and have a long-term support API, then maybe you want to pick Symfony. And with Laravel, because it's very well aligned with fast production, prototyping, finding that product market fit, you might want to start out with that idea in mind that in 1 year, 3 years, whatever we're building now, we're going to throw it away. We're going to migrate. You're laughing. Will that ever really happen? Maybe not. What you build initially, many times you end up getting stuck with forever, right? That migration to another framework, or even if you're staying with the same framework but rebuilding, that can be tricky. So that's where you want to keep all of the details and the differences that we were comparing, keeping those things in mind when you're making choices. Now, if you're working in one of the frameworks personally, and you just want to play around with the different framework that you're not working in every day, definitely encourage it. You'll learn something. And hopefully things that you can bring to the framework that you're used to working in, and making improvements. So that's it. Here's some links, and the link to this presentation, we'll provide that so that you can find this later. This is in a branch of the repo that's specific to this presentation, and I'll be merging that back into the main branch sometime later. It's going to break all of my links, but you'll be able to find this. You can connect with me. I'm almost never tweeting anything, but you can find me there. Sometimes I'll tweet something about my kids. If you're an experienced engineer, or in an engineering organization and you want to pay it forward, I highly encourage you to find Tupu. It is a mentoring platform that is free of charge for underrepresented groups. And then if you want to just give to the world, my favorite charity is
How do you spell
tupu.io.
Thank you.
Yeah. And then Charity Water is my favorite charity. So there you go. Any final questions, comments?
Yeah, like the models that Symfony has are very nice to have, like the attributes and like types of stuff. Because my clinical background is like whenever I'm accessing properties off the model, like in a different spot, I'm guessing I can easily misspell the property name or that sort of thing. So really like that portion.
So the comment was that seeing the way Doctrine models data was interesting, because in Laravel with Eloquent, it's easy to make mistakes and not realize it. You know, if you misspell the name of a field from the database, it's not so easily apparent. Did I get that right? Yeah. Okay.
One workaround for that, are you familiar with very VDH Laravel IDE helper? So it'll code in a whole bunch of at property, at property, at property, at property. And I'll paste this in the chat in a second. But it'll code in that so that it takes you actually can get that tab completion in your IDE. Okay. Very nice. Not perfect, but it's helpful. Yeah.
Any questions or comments from online?
Doesn't look like it. Good talk,
Good.
Israel.
Hand it back to you then.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us. Thank you, Israel, for our speaker this month. Definitely check him out on LinkedIn. And MergePHP. We're on all the things. So we hope you can join us next month. I think I'll leave the stream going here for a little bit, and we'll chat a bit and have a MergePHP meetup here after the talk for a bit, and then we'll call it. So just hang out here and chat, and yeah, hope you all are doing well. Any general PHP questions? You've got a lot of knowledgeable people gathered in one place. So let's go ahead and open up the Q&A to any PHP questions. Let's see. I usually have a good one. Have you upgraded to Laravel 10 yet? Who is on the latest version of Laravel? This is maybe a question for anyone.
Not quite.
Not quite.
We're using Slim. Does that count as an upgrade to Laravel?
Nice. Is Laravel 10 the next LTS? I'm looking it up. Or maybe it looks like. Or did they get rid of the LTSs? I can't remember. Had it at one point. They just have a list of currently supported versions. See some people moving to 10. That's good. All right. How about it? Question for the audience. What was your first PHP framework? Mine was CodeIgniter. I saw somebody else in chat mention it. Hello. Are you still there, Israel?
I'm here.
Oh, okay.
Was that a question for me?
Anyone, if anyone in the audience there, just a question for everyone. If you just want to shout out some of your, if anyone wants to share what their first PHP framework was.
Mine was Symphony 1.4. What about everyone else here? Zen framework?
Lemonade, micro framework for me, and then
Lemonade?
Lemonade. Yeah, I posted in the chat. And then Symphony 2. It was actually Symphony 2.0. It was right before they started with Composer.
Nice. We've got several cake PHP.
Somebody brings up Slim. That's a nice one to see.
I think a good representation there. Two Laravel, two people used Laravel was their first framework. I think that's a good framework for your first one. I guess that brings up another question. What's the better framework to learn with for new people? Symfony or Laravel?
Rails. Nice.
Django. any opinions on the best PHP framework for newbies?
No framework, then you don't have to look up any docs.
Build your own framework? I don't think that's a good first approach, right? Because then, like, you screw it up a lot. I mean, I guess if you,
Framework is fine, just realize that you're going to throw the entire thing away and then use something else.
yep, exactly. Yeah, Ian said there in person that, you know, just build it yourself, but then throw the whole thing away. No opinions.
Nobody said WordPress.
That's like an ecosystem. Drupal. Any Drupals in the audience?
People use that one. It is not, it is a CMS. Yes. Drupal uses Symfony components now though. Anyway. All right, you want to close this off?
All right. Well, thank you, Israel. I really appreciate the talk. That's good to hear. Framework talks are always good, so I appreciate it. So, and I'm glad we're representing there in person. So that is cool to see. Region 13. We were meeting at Region 13. I can tell the background based on the walls, and so Region 13. We met there for, I don't know, 15 years, something like, probably, right up until the pandemic, pretty much. So that is our old home base.
This is a room we've been in many times.
Yep. Yep. All right, everyone. I'm going to close it out here. June 2023. Thanks all for joining us. A reminder for next month, we're going to be talking about WordPress CLI. So hope you all can make it in July. And yeah, thanks again for showing up. We'll see you soon.
Thanks, Israel. Really informative.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great talk.
Thank you.